decided to do this standing up. Yeah?
More energy, right? If we stand.
Yeah, because we just had lunch. So that was your idea, yeah? So today's talk is anchored into this paper that has recently won the Nobel Prize. And I would like Temur to decode the paper itself. So tell us how innovation helps economies for a long-term sustained economic growth.
Thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon, SFF folks. Friday afternoon. Hope we keep you awake. The Nobel Prize this year was given to 3 economists. So first you have Joel Mocker from Northwestern University in Tel Aviv. He jointly holds positions there. Then there's Philippe Aghion, who's between INSEAD and LSE. And then there is Peter Howitt, who's at Brown University. Now, the prize was not given evenly. Mocker got half the prize, and Aghion and Howitt got the other half of the prize. So there is a distribution of importance of contribution of these economists in this Nobel Prize. But there's a very interesting common thread. The thread is, how does innovation play a goal in prosperity? Because the work of these 3 people show that without innovation, there is absolutely no prosperity. You can have a lot of oil, you can have a lot of gas, you can have a lot of people, but that will allow you to hold some power. But overall, your economy will be flat. It won't really grow. And the essence of the work of these people is that with innovation, you can have a cycle around ideas becoming democratized, ideas creating wealth, that wealth generating enthusiasm about other innovators to want to create their own innovation, and that creates a cycle of innovation. But as Philippe Aghion also shows, that the democratization of idea is very, very important. If you look at human history, say from 0 AD all the way to 1800, you actually see lives rather stagnant. There were cycles of prosperity. There was the Roman Empire and the Mughal Empire and the Ottomans and all sorts of empire. You saw the rise of the colonial powers. But till 1800s, we don't really see economic growth picking up in any meaningful manner. What happened during that time is that not that there were no inventions. There were inventions. In fact, in the 1600s and 1700s, around the Renaissance, or even before that, during the sort of the Middle Ages in the Middle East, there was flourishing of innovation in mathematics and medicine, in engineering. The Galileos and Newtons were not at 1800. They were there long before that. But still, there was no discernible impact on the lives of the average person or the overall GDP of the world. If you went to rural England in 1750, or if you went there in 350, life was more or less the same. And Philippe Aghion talks about why that was the case. It was because ideas were not getting democratized. There were brilliant ideas here and there, that the scientific method, the why behind invention was not there. And without the why, there were some observational inventions or discoveries. I see that the sun rises in this direction, I see the sun rises in that direction with regularity. It's a part of science. But understanding of gravitational pull, understanding of rotation of the heavenly bodies, or the molecular structure, none of these things people knew. They made observations, they were smart people, but what happened by the time it was 1800 was the ideas started getting anchored around the scientific method. Precise measurements, precise standard operating protocol, the SOPs that Kathy was telling me about earlier, that started getting built in, and that allowed scaling up of manufacturing, of agriculture, and that's where we first began to see growth. Without that, we would still have lots of brilliant ideas, but that gain from innovation into production to scaled up economic performance would not have happened.
But then I want to ask you about productivity. So I think in the public sector, in the private sector, everybody is concerned about how we raise productivity, right? So as an economist, how would you say you're measuring productivity? Are you still measuring it like you did traditionally? Are you comfortable with that? Or do you think that there should be another approach to measuring productivity and that we make sure that all of the workforce, they actually in reality increase their productivity on a daily basis, because that transitions into higher economic growth?
Absolutely. I'm going to address the productivity issue in a second because it's a hard question. I want to take my time to think about that for a second. But before I do that, I just want to add one more critical ingredient in economic growth, that is failure. If you don't have what, again, Aghion and Howitt wrote about, creative destruction, fantastic paper, 1992, full of mathematical equation, but the essence of the paper was, when you have a company or an innovator coming up with a new idea, their objective is to extract as much money, as much profit out of that. Patent protection, monopoly, whatever you can do, you create a barrier. But around the society, when people see you becoming very prosperous around your monopoly idea, monopoly rent, they will want to match your innovation or succeed, surpass it. When they do, you will go out of business. And the insight from Aghion is that this is an absolutely critical part of the economic growth story. If you don't have creative destruction, if I can capture regulation, if I can capture special interest and maintain my monopoly power, I will have very little incentive to continue innovating, and I will suppress the new entrepreneurs. So that, along with the democratization idea, essence of growth. Now, Kathy, your question is, if we have had this amazing culture of innovation over the last 200 years, and it seems like innovation is speeding up, big IT revolution 30 years ago, big AI revolution as we're talking about it, but how come we as economists are not being able to measure it very well? Robert Lucas, another Nobel laureate, but he got the Nobel Prize a long time ago, he said that technology is everywhere, but it's not in the statistics. When we look at America's growth performance, when we look at India's growth performance, what we call total factor productivity,
Yes.
which you measure after taking into account accumulation of capital labor, is not that impressive. I mean, what happened? I mean, all these amazing phones that you guys are recording this conversation with, how come they're not adding to this incredibly big productive world? Or are we just using these phones to do TikTok and Facebook and not really adding to productivity in a meaningful manner? I think the answer is somewhere in between. Maybe sometimes the hype cycle is so big that every new invention or innovation is seen as the elixir of future prosperity. Maybe that is sometimes not the case. But it is also the case that we as economists are probably not doing a very good job of measuring productivity.
But then, so my next question is around the same thing, right? The next wave of innovation, we see AI as a very central part of it, right? And we see multiple data points on how AI is enhancing productivity. So, from a private sector view, at your own bank and in your daily life, how much has AI affected or improved your productivity? Has it? Has it not?
So let's distinguish between AI and Gen AI. I
Yeah.
think it's much easier to answer the productivity implications of AI. My bank, DBS, has been embracing AI-related disruption
Which
for a
we all
decade and a
know.
half, and we can provide auditable, fully accounting standard-based measures of how we've added to our P&L from embracing AI. Gen AI, different story. But before I come across as somebody who's not being that convinced by Gen AI, I'm just going to point out that the reason we struggle to measure productivity is the economist way of measuring productivity is how much value is being created in the economy by putting a dollar amount to our activities. But if somehow an innovation leads to the quality of water getting better, quality of air getting better, or somehow I can do certain things with less stress, not necessarily faster, but just easier, it's very hard for an economist like me to measure that and have it reflected in GDP. I really can't, or my peers haven't really come up with a better way of doing that. So now on the Gen AI issue, I may say that being able to summarize meeting notes or being able to have a bunch of agents do a couple of things that my research assistant used to do is good to have, but it's not really revolutionized my life. But the problem with that argument that I'm trying to make is that I'm missing another very critical component of the modern growth story, which is diffusion. We will only know how useful Gen AI is when it is diffused in a wide, penetrative, broad manner. Till then, the debate about whether it is revolutionary or not will be concentrated in Singapore FinTech Festival, in the pitches that Gen AI entrepreneurs are making to their capital providers, that area. What we need to find out over time, and this will only happen over time, is that as this new wave of technology gets diffused across the world, does it change the world for the better in a meaningful manner? So when the internet revolution happened, again, we had the dot-com boom and bust, we had lots of wealth creation for the Amazons of the world, but till mobile phones came around, we really didn't have internet diffuse around the world the way it did after the mobile telephony. So it's actually a couple of inventions and innovation. The multiplicative impact of that, that becomes very powerful. And that is something only visible with hindsight, unless you're a very optimistic entrepreneur, you see the future in a rosy way, and you paint it that way. Me being the boring conservative economist will wait for the data.
Okay, fine. Thanks for that. Now, my next question is around talent. Okay, with all the innovation happening in AI, tokenization, even quantum we are talking about, one of the key themes that has emerged over the last 2 days has been talent. And how do you make sure that we, the youth of today, we are at least upskilling ourselves, I don't know, over months or years, right? And what more can we do? So I'm asking this as your fangirl. Okay, I want to understand what more can we do, what more can the youth do, just to keep up pace with the emerging technologies.
Let me start with a bit of a historical perspective. The US went through a major increase in innovation, productivity, prosperity in the 1950s and 60s. The public sector played a big role in supporting the universities in the US, pumping a lot of research and development grant. That was one big help. But the other big, without any question, unambiguous ingredient in the US outperformance was the fact that a lot of very brilliant scientists from Europe immigrated to the US in the 1940s. You had the Holocaust taking place, brilliant Jewish scientists, they all moved from Europe to the US. You had lots of other people who were facing oppression in Germany, not necessarily Jewish. They moved and they fundamentally changed the face of the US rocket program, US semiconductor program. Look at the history of all the key innovations that were coming out of the US, immigrant scientists. So when we talk about talent, the first and foremost thing is you want to get the best in the world. No country is big enough and self-sufficient enough to harness all the brilliance on their own, not China, not the US, definitely not our little red dot Singapore. We have to remain open to the best and the brightest of the world, and we have seen that. When you have the best and the brightest, go to an enabling environment, that environment flourishes like there's no tomorrow. So that's issue one. Second is that intersection of public sector support. You cannot point out any major key scientific breakthrough in the US that took place in the 50s and 60s that did not receive massive amount of state support. The state support has to be long-term. It cannot be about, I give you money and you produce a patent tomorrow. It has to be patient. It has to recognize creative destruction. It has to recognize the risk of failure. And it has to remain patient and have faith in the whole process.
So, as we stand today, do you think the public sector is doing enough in the Western world and here in Asia Pacific? What do you think?
I'm just amazed by how 2025 has changed that dynamic.
Yeah.
The US, for 60, 70 years, the beacon of bringing the best and the bright of the world, is telling them, don't come, or even if you come, we'll keep an eye on you. If you're of Chinese origin, you could be a spy. If you're of Indian origin, I may not give you an H-1B visa, all sorts of stuff. America's loss is our gain without any question. We're seeing scholars program from the UK to Singapore to China, and everywhere you'll see that the next generation of innovators will not necessarily look at the US as default. They'll look at a wider spectrum of places to deploy their brilliance, and because the talent industry is going to be mobile, the best and the brightest will come to places that give them the best incentive. And Singapore certainly is very much part of that dynamic, providing all sorts of incentives to researchers.
How about DBS
labs.
Bank?
Well, DBS is a tiny part of the much bigger story. But yeah, when you look at DBS's sort of model of promoting and generating talent, one of the key ingredients is one has to sort of have international experience. That the up-and-coming, high-potential people, we call them hypos at DBS, will have to spend a few years in Taiwan, get some idea about how to deal with talent in Taiwan, would have to spend some time in Hong Kong, some India. So that sort of, diffusing the
Giving them
staff
exposure also.
is absolutely critical because every part of our operation is global in nature. So recognizing the international aspect of innovation, tech, talent.
And
is
also
absolutely
very close collaboration with your with the neighboring countries, right? You have to understand the perspective of your neighboring countries. What are they doing? Keep up with what's happening in innovation side, right?
Kathy, the answer is, of course, yes. But the biggest context of that answer is on the green transition side. Without Singapore's cooperation with the regional countries on the ASEAN electricity grid, or raising money for data centers in Malaysia, but maybe funded through a vehicle in Singapore, or figuring out the wind farms in Vietnam and how they can sort of be part of the regional grid, all of this require regional thinking, regional cooperation, and some degree of alignment among the private sector and the public sector in the region. Because going back to my earlier point, that technological innovation provides the biggest bang for the buck when the tech is diffused. On climate change related matters, as China sort of drives down the cost of energy production and all the green energy related hardware, we sitting in Southeast Asia or South Asia or anywhere else in the world, it is incumbent upon us to embrace that declining cost curve so that we can harness green transition faster, because only when it is diffused will we get the full bang for the buck. Quick example of that is Pakistan. Of all the countries in the world, if I told you Pakistan is the second largest importer of solar panels, you'd be surprised, but that's a fact. They are importing solar panels like there's no tomorrow from China, so much so that Pakistani homes are becoming increasingly self-sufficient in generating electricity. It is beginning to destabilize the core grid of Pakistan because demand for the core grid is collapsing because everybody is basically generating the electricity from solar. As a result, Pakistan's policy has to be calibrated. They're putting 10% tariff on solar panel imports. What this example tells you again is that you will only see the full impact of tech innovation, including in green transition, when there is full diffusion of the technology.
Okay. Now, last question to you. What are the three big trends that you see apart from AI that you see will bring the next destructive wave of technology and support economic growth?
You know, the answer is one word, 3 times. China, China, China. When we look at key innovations coming in the areas, not just green transition and semiconductors and quantum, but on life sciences, on avionics, areas where Western labs from Stanford to MIT to Oxford, Cambridge used to lead for decades. Today, it's China Academy of Science, it's Tsinghua, it's Beijing. That's where the biggest flow of innovation is coming out. When you look at the World Intellectual Property Organization's database, key patent cluster in the world is not Silicon Valley, it's Shenzhen, Guangdong. So in front of our eyes, China is being transformed from a country that sort of copies Western IP, builds a lot of stuff in scale and drives down costs, to a country that is generating the key technologies of the future. To me, this is the most underappreciated tech trend out there, that we are so sort of immersed in the whole trade war and tariff and China can get NVIDIA's chip story, that we're missing out in the next 10, 15 years. Some of the key technologies that you and I and our countries and governments would want to consume will be coming from China, not from the West.
Wow, okay. So to summarize, I take away 3 things from you. Recognizing creative destruction, talent, and tech diffusion. And with that, I think we've come to the close of the session right on time. And thank you so much, Taimur, for coming. It's a pleasure to host you. And by the way, it's my first time on stage, and lovely to have Taimur with us. Thank you,
Fantastic,
Taimur.
Kwati. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.